Western observers typically analyze Russian geopolitics through the lens of strategic interest. In this view, economic isolation and regional conflict appear as failures. However, the internal logic of the Kremlin's ideological advisors suggests that systemic decay and isolation are the primary objectives of the state. This level of physical devastation functions as a deliberate feature of the ideology. By reducing entire cities to rubble, the state physically manifests a philosophy that prioritizes the destruction of existing order over the construction of a stable future. Alexander Dugin provides the intellectual blueprint for this embrace of ruin. Since the 1990s, his work has transitioned from the esoteric fringe to the center of Russian geopolitical thought, providing a philosophical justification for total war. Dugin identifies logos, the foundational Western principle of reason, logic, and structured order, as his primary enemy. He argues that this rational framework has reached its end and must be replaced by a return to chaos, which he describes as a fertile, primordial state of being. The state uses this rejection of logic to create a vacuum. When a society abandons the requirement for objective truth, the resulting space is filled by a worship of pure entropy, where the only measurable outcome is the speed of disintegration. This vacuum leaves the populace vulnerable to occult belief systems that frame themselves as tradition. These movements often leverage the language of ancient heritage to conceal a core objective: the systematic dismantling of the modern human intellect. Entropy functions as a political weapon. It deliberately dissolves social structures, international treaties, and domestic institutions until only a formless sludge remains. The roots of this strategy lie in the esoteric Yuzhinsky circle of the 1980s, where these concepts of sacred chaos were first tested. These ideas eventually merged with state psychological programs, transforming from private rituals into national doctrine. Modern Russian aggression follows this occult calculus rather than standard economics. The strategy views mass suffering and the collapse of neighboring societies as proof of the state's power to return the world to its natural, chaotic state. The transition from philosophy to practice is visible in groups like the Cult of Zagnil. Emerging from the same esoteric circles as Dugin, this movement originated in the overlap between underground occultists and the psychological operation departments of the Soviet intelligence services. The cult centers on a doctrine of total inversion. It teaches that illness, corruption, and physical rot are actually cleansing forces. By reframing suffering as a gift, the movement encourages its followers to embrace the breakdown of the very systems that sustain their lives. Modern Kaufits like Denis Baiguzin move these ideas into the digital age. They use online coaching and social media networks to subject followers to psychological pressure, breaking down individual critical thinking until they accept decay as a spiritual necessity. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a clear trial of this mindset. Cult networks actively promoted infection and discouraged medical intervention, viewing the spread of the virus as a manifestation of their deity's power to dismantle biological and social order. These methods aim to turn the citizenry into a collective that no longer values its own survival. Individual critical thinking is replaced by a shared drive toward nihilism and the celebration of institutional collapse. This mindset informs the highest level of state policy. Vladimir Putin's push for a multipolar world order serves as the political application of Dugin's chaos, aiming to dissolve a unified global legal framework into a series of fragmented, lawless zones. This version of multipolarity rejects the idea of universal human rights. It seeks to return the world to a state of tribal warfare, where every regional power is free to rule its subjects through the law of the jungle, unencumbered by international standards. Ukraine represents a unique obstacle to this project. Its commitment to transparent governance and the rule of law functions as a form of social immunity against the cult's ideology of disintegration. Leaders who prioritize institutional clarity and rational defense are viewed by this ideology as spiritual enemies. They represent the logos, the order, that the Duginist framework is designed to destroy. State media translates these esoteric concepts for a mass audience by framing the war in apocalyptic terms. The invasion is presented as a sacred flow of violence. necessary to drown out the last remnants of organized Western-aligned civilization in the region. The Kremlin has successfully integrated the goals of a fringe death cult with the machinery of a nuclear state. They have transformed military conquest into a spiritual project aimed at the general dismantling of human reason and international stability. The ultimate goal of this system is the permanent dissolution of the human intellect. By prioritizing myth and tribal loyalty over facts and logic, it forces a regression toward a primitive state of existence. Dugin's radical subject is an individual who intentionally operates as a virus, destroying structure wherever they find it. This stands in opposition to the rational actor who seeks to improve human life through the mastery of the physical world. The cult presents two feedback loops. On the left, their promise of freedom through surrendering the mind results in a downward spiral into formless static. On the right is the path to liberation, achieved through mental discipline and constructing stable systems to measure progress. The ideology of chaos offers only a slow suicide pact for the species, providing no path except the eventual annihilation of consciousness. Humanity is now forced to choose between the path of tribalism and the path of reason. This decision will define the trajectory of our species. The path of reason demands an uncompromising commitment to the scientific method and the rejection of all irrational dogmas. It requires us to test our assumptions against reality rather than surrendering to comfortable myths. Choosing this path means taking responsibility for our own survival. We must prioritize the engineering of solutions for our biological and environmental challenges over the embrace of destructive ideologies. This commitment to logic finds its ultimate expression in the work of the Russian scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. He argued that order and engineering allow us to leave our planetary cradle and master the physics of the stars. The struggle against this weaponized entropy is a fundamental conflict for the survival of the rational mind. We are deciding whether humanity will succumb to the gravity of its own decay or continue its ascent through the clarity of thought.